7 force field. Don't worry. I'll break you out of there. Glad I could help.
Here are some numbers that I found out today. 12,500 work permits have been expedited for people who have illegally entered Canada from the United States and claimed asylum in the last year. The Minister of Public Safety said of the tens of thousands of people that have come to Canada illegally from the United States, only 1% have been removed. This is while he's saying that he thinks that 90% of the people currently crossing the border will be found ineligible to be here. This is ridiculous. Today, the Liberals, the Minister of Public Safety, the Minister of Immigration, the very people who are charged with keeping our borders safe and running a compassionate, orderly, planned migration system, came out with some pretty big whoppers of talking points. They said that there is no free ticket to coming to Canada. They talked about these numbers, which they were all over the place. They talked about, they were basically just trying to spin Canadians rather than taking action on the crisis that we're seeing at the Quebec-US border crossing. This morning I held a press conference to push back on some of these big whoppers. Watch what happened. Today, the Liberal government continued their Band-Aid approach to the illegal border crossing crisis. By perpetuating falsehoods and refusing to take concrete action to prevent people from exploiting the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, they are risking making the situation worse. First of all, the Liberals this morning claimed that tens of thousands of people illegally entering Canada from the U.S. is fair to new Canadians and others trying to legally sponsor people into Canada. In fact, over 80 immigration officials, think about this for a second, 80 immigration officials have been redirected to processing people illegally entering Canada. At committee last week, we also heard that hundreds of border crossing agents have been reallocated to the Lacole border. The minister has also said that they are prioritizing healthcare and work permits for those who have illegally crossed the border into Canada. Meanwhile, there are over 45,000 cases of privately sponsored refugees that languish in UNHCR camps. Reallocating these resources undoubtedly has an impact on processing other immigration lines, including family reunification. The Liberals also said that by throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at this problem, the situation will get better. Today, the Liberals re-announced funding that they already had allocated in Budget 2018. As recently as last Thursday, the Immigration Refugee Board said that they did not know how money would be spent to help their operations. This news is coming as record amounts of people are illegally entering Canada from the United States. This also follows news that the Liberals are setting up a refugee camp at the US-Canada border. There is no evidence that this will stem the tide of people exploiting the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement. In fact, the Liberals once again refused to commit to closing the loophole. The Liberals this morning have also claimed that talking to cohorts of people is stemming the tide of people. In fact, the numbers of people illegally entering Canada from the US has only increased this year. We wouldn't have to go to countries like Nigeria to tell people not to come if the loophole didn't exist in the first place. The money and time expended on these efforts could be better spent to make the immigration system more functional for those playing by the rules. Imagine, we're sending Canadian agents to oversee the processing of US visas in Nigeria. Why wouldn't we just close the loophole? The Liberals also this morning said that they are removing people who are found to be ineligible to be in Canada. In fact, removal orders have dramatically increased under the Liberals, yet most of them have not been executed. The Minister of Public Safety said today that 90% of the Nigerians who have entered Canada will be found to be ineligible to be here. But the reality is that it will likely take years to process their refugee claims and then years to remove them. The Liberals have no plan to rectify this. Also, this whole process costs Canadians millions and millions of dollars. Why wouldn't they just close the loophole and prevent this problem from occurring in the first place? The Liberals actually said this morning that asylum seekers don't get a, quote, free ticket to Canada. The reality is that people who illegally enter Canada from the United States will be here for years before their asylum claims are processed, and also have access to lengthy appeals process. At that point, it will likely be years before they are removed from Canada if their asylum claim is not valid. In the meantime, the Liberals are expediting their work permits, social assistance payments, and healthcare access. They will have access to these services for years, free of charge. Meanwhile, mayors and premiers across Canada are asking Prime Minister Trudeau for help coping with the overburdened homeless shelters and food banks that are filled with people who have illegally entered Canada from the United States. This is unfair, unsustainable, and uncompassionate, and frankly, there's a human face to this issue. Additionally, the Liberals have recently changed the sponsorship agreements for privately sponsored refugees so that their allowances can be reduced if they refuse a reasonable job offer. The Liberals are valuing entitlement over integration, and the situation at the U.S. border is only reinforcing this message to the Canadian public. They risk turning Canadian support away from our once compassionate and orderly immigration system. Finally, the myth that the Liberals perpetuated this morning is that they support the intent of the Safe Third Country Agreement. In reality, by taking no action to close the loophole and allowing people to continue to illegally stream into Canada unabated, they are effectively rendering it null and void. Further, on April 27th, a federal court ruled that refugees could claim asylum in Canada out of fear of being deported from the United States. This case is Francesco versus Canada. This fundamentally opposes the logic of the Safe Third Country Agreement, which holds that the United States upholds international laws on refugees, including the principle of non-refoulement. Yet we have heard nothing from the Liberals on if they plan to appeal this ruling, which would have profound implications on the integrity of our own asylum claim system. Further, this is a global issue. Canada is granting asylum to people who have lived in other G7 countries for many years prior to entering Canada and claiming asylum. The European Union is currently seized with this issue and is looking to renegotiate treaties to further prevent asylum claim shopping while strengthening pathways for people to legally enter their countries. Why has Trudeau not raised global asylum claim reform, arguably one of the most pressing issues of global concern, with his G7 presidency? That is why today, Andrew Scheer's Conservatives are calling on the Prime Minister to add this to the G7 agenda. The Liberals continue to fail to address the illegal border crossing crisis. On this path, things will only get worse. Once again, Conservatives are calling upon the Prime Minister to take concrete action to prevent asylum claim shopping and protect the integrity of Canada's immigration system and borders. Thank you. You notice I asked for two very important things at the end of that conference. First of all, that the government come out and make this issue, that is asylum system reform, which is now a global concern. Certainly we know that it's a concern in the European Union, this should be something that's on the G7 agenda. This year, the Prime Minister of Canada actually has the presidency of the G7, and meetings are going on this week. Why hasn't he made this the topic or a priority agenda item? The other thing that I want to highlight for you is that we found out that there was actually a court ruling that could have profound effects on Canada's asylum claim system. And I was asking the government whether or not they had plans to appeal it. We asked this in question period today, again, those two questions, and the ministers just kind of lost their mind when we did this. I want you to watch my colleague Alice Wong ask about the fact that there have been many processing agents, so people responsible for processing immigration streams from all different areas, including family reunification, to processing the applications of people who are illegally entering the country from the United States of America. Watch the minister's response. I, of course, asked him today about the 12,500 work permits that were expedited for people who have illegally entered Canada from the United States. Watch his response.
Mr. Speaker, truly vulnerable refugees in the world don't have the means to fly to the United States and sneak across the Canadian border. Many languish in refugee camps, waiting in a 45,000-case private sponsorship backlog. They can't jump the line. Yet, the Liberals are allowing others to do just that. How is that fair or compassionate?
The Minister of Immigration.
Speaker, the Harper Conservatives wouldn't know what compassionate if it hit them in the face. Mr. Speaker, this is the party. The Harper Conservatives cut $400 million from border security operations, and they pretend to care about the border. The Harper Conservatives kept families apart, spouses, live-in caregiver programs, children, and others in queues. We inherited a huge ballooning backlog under the privately sponsored refugees. They have no idea what compassion is about. They didn't care about Yazidi refugees, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister has issued 12,500 expedited work permits for people who have entered Canada illegally from the United States in the last year alone. There are hundreds of thousands of people, including new Canadians, who are out of work or could be out of work and are trying to make ends meet. Planned, orderly migration grows our economy. What is happening at the Quebec-U.S. border is not planned, orderly, fair, or compassionate. Why won't the Prime Minister close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
The Harper Conservatives never understood a very simple thing about immigration, that investment follows talent. They didn't make the necessary investments in immigration processing. Let's stick to the numbers. Parents and grandparents had to wait years under that party to come to Canada. Spouses and children were kept apart for years under that party. Privately sponsored refugees were kept for years apart under that party. We inherited a 50,000 backlog in privately sponsored refugees. And yes, they lack compassion because they cut refugee health care, Mr. Speaker.
So there you have it. The Liberals hold a big press conference this morning and, again, have no plan to deal with what's happening at the Quebec-U.S. border. I just find this reprehensible at this point in time. Because Canada should be a country that is open and welcoming to people who come here that are playing by the rules. Essentially what the Liberals have done is they have suspended the Safe Third Country Agreement. Again, for those of you who are just watching for the first time, Canada has an agreement with the United States of America. It was actually signed under a Liberal government in 2002 that says that if you reach Canada or the United States, you shouldn't be able to then cross the border and claim asylum in the other country. And that was put in place to prevent asylum claim shopping. That agreement only talks about or only applies to official points of entry. So somebody could illegally enter the country and then claim asylum from there. So essentially what the Liberals have done by not enforcing the border or not trying to renegotiate the agreement so that it applies to the entire US-Canadian land borders, they've kind of just said, well, we're just going to suspend this. That's essentially what they're doing right now. And to me, that's really wrong. You know, I and my party leader, Andrew Scheer, have been suggesting for a year that the Liberal government approach the Americans to renegotiate this agreement. They have not done so, and we've seen a giant spike in numbers of people illegally entering the country from the United States and then claiming asylum. We've also gone as far to suggest that perhaps if the agreement can't be negotiated with the United States in a very short period of time, they should have done it last year, but hey, here we are, that surely the Liberals can use Parliament, the tools that we have at our disposal, to create laws and legislation that technically defines, for the purposes of applying this agreement, the entire US-Canadian border as an official point of entry. Now, of course, the Liberals have sent out department officials and they're saying, well, this can't work because we'd have to put border agents and run it as official point of entry. You know, they're looking for reasons to not make this work. How come Parliament can't come up with legislation, or the minister couldn't come up with an interpretation of regulations that just technically for the application of that agreement states that the entire US-Canadian land border is an official point of entry for the purposes of applying that agreement? It's beyond me. You know, I've had media come to me and say, well, will this work? What about this? What about that? This is a debate we should be having in Parliament right now, given how much this issue has in terms of an impact on our immigration system. I have like 3 or 4 staff, the Minister of Immigration, the Minister of Public Safety, the Ministers of Justice. All of these people have thousands of bureaucrats at their disposal that are ostensibly supposed to be doing things like maintaining the sovereignty of our borders, and maintaining the integrity of a planned, orderly immigration system. I don't think we're asking too much, and I think a lot of Canadians are saying, look, do your job, Trudeau. I'm doing my job. I'm working hard for you, trying to hold these Liberals to account for this mess that they've created at the hashtag Welcome to Canada, US, Quebec border crossing. Working hard for you in Ottawa. Have a great day.